All you have to do is upload a video of what you like the most about the school with the hashtag #SchoolIsEnding on TikTok, and we'll select the best, and then give an award to the person at the student final meeting, Jerry said. He was the student chairperson, the one who was in charge of making sure that things went well in the school, either socially, academically, and including relationships with the school staff. High school was a tough place, a place that could mold you into so many things. And I was sure that everyone who'd passed through that stage had one or two things to say about it. Jerry was a smart guy also. He knew that uploading videos on the internet was somehow permanent, because you could go back to it any day, and after so many years to just relive the memory. I walked up to my best friend as soon as Jerry finished talking and dismissed everyone, and I saw her wiping her tears. She was always the lively type. The type to wipe the tears of others and not cry herself. She turned around as soon as I tapped her and tried to clean her face of the tears that had stained her face. And when I asked about it, she laughed back at me and told me that it was nothing. She said she was just practicing for a drama that was coming up in her group. I couldn't help but believe her. She was indeed in the drama club, but even if she was practicing, the way she cried felt too real to just be for a play. I took my mind off it and chatted with her a little bit. And though her mind seemed off throughout the conversation, I bid her goodbye eventually and went back home. At home, my mind kept going back to Anne. I wasn't at peace with the reason she told me. Somehow, I just knew something else was up and she wasn't telling me the truth. I picked up my phone after trying to convince myself that I was thinking about it too much, but I couldn't still find peace within myself. I called her several times, sent voicemails and text messages, but she didn't reply to any. My intuition was at its peak, and I couldn't just ignore. I was always right, about 90% of the time. I kept calling her while trying to dress up to go to her house, but she still wasn't picking up. Something kept telling me that something was off for every minute that I wasted not being able to reach her, and I resorted to calling her mom, even though I wasn't really a fan of who she was as a mother. I tried her several times till I finished dressing up, and she was not picking up as well. I said goodbye to my parents and headed for her house. I listened to calming songs on the way, and when I reached her house, everywhere looked calm and all the lights were on. I almost turned around when I noticed a dark figure of what I was sure was a man running out of the house. I was a bit confused because I knew that Anne didn't have a brother, and her dad was at the other side of town, which meant there wasn't supposed to be any guy in her house, except if she had a boyfriend that she'd not told me about. I walked a little bit further, hoping to catch whatever was going on, but I was forced to stop when I noticed the same figure running back into the house, but with a long stick in his hand. He hit the door several times, and when it finally opened, he threw the stick away and ran inside in anger. Different TikTok sounds played in the background at the highest volume, which was kind of weird also because Anne was not a TikTok fan. She didn't even have the app on her phone, much less talk about watching videos on it. What's the point of the application, really? I don't just fancy it. Like other social media applications are not enough? Just waste time I could use to read, she said the other day when I tried to show her a video that I thought was funny. It was true that she was a nerd. She read a lot, but I just hoped that she'd wake up one day and just want to get social. The house suddenly became silent, and the lights flickered for a few seconds before going dark completely. I used the nearby bushes as a cover in case anyone that wasn't Anne could see me from inside the house. The light in the house came on brighter this time around, and screams followed. I panicked, because the voice was too familiar to ignore. I knew that voice anywhere. Anne was in danger. I ran to the entrance of the house, and it was locked. I pulled on the handle several times, but the door wouldn't open. I ran around the house for any window that was open, but they were all locked. I could feel myself almost in tears for her. She was hurting, and I couldn't do anything for her. While thinking about what to do, a tick-tock sound came on for a few minutes and then went off. What exactly is the tick-tock sound for? I thought. I came out of my thoughts when I heard footsteps approaching the front door. I need to do something, I thought. I ran to the door quickly, picked up the stick that the figure dropped earlier, and waited patiently behind the door for whoever was going to walk out of the door. The door opened rather abruptly and almost hit me when the figure came out. I didn't waste any time hitting him on the head, and he fell to the ground almost immediately and went lifeless. "Anne?" I yelled into the house before turning the body on the floor to face me. "Jerry?" I questioned myself before Anne walked out. "What's Jerry doing here?" Anne began to cry and hugged me as soon as she saw that he was on the floor. "Tell me what's going on. Are you okay?" I asked her gently as I rubbed my hand on her head. "He and my mom, they've been..." She couldn't complete the statement, but I knew where she was going. If it was her mom, I just knew where it was going. Her mom was what people called a madam, and she didn't exclude her daughter being one of her workers, and apparently Jerry was one of her clients. I was quite shocked because I didn't expect Jerry to be involved in anything like that. He was too good and responsible of a man to do things like that. I wondered what would happen when others hear about it. "And the TikTok sounds?" I asked her. She shook her head before telling me that Jerry just had a weird obsession with TikTok and always loved to use the sounds to do anything he wanted. I hugged her again. "It's high time we reported your mom. I'm sure you've had enough, and so have I." She nodded, and we walked into her house while I dialed 911.
Did you enjoy the first story? If you did, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. The majority of my friends were from TikTok, and I barely had a life outside of the internet, and I had no problem with it. I had somehow chased off everyone around me and rented a single flat alone. In the long run, I got unfortunate with my lucky streak of good online friends when I met Sarah, a photographer on TikTok who was an internet freak like me. During the early days of our friendship, we'd chat all day until midnight, and I always woke up to her good morning text. Ordinarily, her online presence was too extra, but a geek like me found solace in her friendship. "When would we meet?" she asked one night as I lay on my bed. "I'd be free this week," I replied, blushing. We'd been friends for 2 months, but I'd never seen her because she lived 2 cities away, which means she might have slept overnight if she came. However, her job had her stuck to her city, but she wanted to see me so bad and picked a weekend. "This weekend?" she asked. "Friday?" "I'd be home too," I affirmed. The week ran out and she informed me the moment she was leaving her city as early as 6 a.m. Hours later, roughly into the evening, Sarah called me on her arrival in my neighborhood. It was easy thanks to my description and Google Maps. I scurried outside to wait for her under the lamppost. Minutes later, she arrived in a taxi. Sarah alighted from the taxi and ran towards me with open arms. "Jessie?" she giggled as she wrapped me in her arms. She looked familiar, like I had seen her somewhere other than her picture and profile. I couldn't place it, but I was sure I had seen her somewhere else. I helped her lift her bag in as she locked the door behind me and ejected the key. I swiftly turned to watch her as she retrieved the key into her pocket. "You removed the key?" I gazed at her hand. "Oh, I'm sorry," she giggled and walked towards me. "This place looks like my home. Old habits, you know." She raised her brow with a look of understanding and helped me lift her bags to the visitor's room. I noticed she didn't return the key, but I waved it off and helped her settle in. Sarah had her bath and joined me in the sitting room where I cuddled my duvet with my eyes glued to my screen while I scrolled through my newsfeed. "You've got any neighbors?" She tried to hook a conversation, and it was at that point I realized she should have stayed as an online friend. "None," I muttered, turning to see her. "Just you? Must be fun." She giggled and took a seat adjacent to mine. I evaded her question with disgust in my voice. I suddenly saw a picture of her on my timeline. I raised my head to match the identity and she caught my eyes in the act. She was the one. "What's that?" she asked. The name on the wanted serial killer list was Sandra with her picture. "Sandra?" I muttered loud enough for her to hear, and she responded by swinging a dagger from her nightwear, running towards me furiously. I jumped away from her line of sight, but she showed expertise by plunging towards me midair with the dagger aiming for my throat. I forcefully yanked the dagger before she regained balance and pulled it to cut her, but it only scratched her. I then pushed her with my feet and stumbled out of her way with the dagger in my hand now. I watched her stand up, and as I got the chance, I ran towards the back door, but she caught my leg just before I could escape and made me slip. It was dark outside, and I could barely see her. I turned and used the dagger to cut her hand. As soon as she let go, I scampered up and dashed into the darkness, running for my life.
Children always annoyed me. Their giggling, the unnecessary crying, and the constant demand for something they didn't even need at times. I had made up my mind right from the time I finished high school not to have any kids, no matter how pressured I felt or how much my husband wanted one. It was hard enough carrying the children for 9 months, talk less of having to raise them to be responsible humans. My mother must have done a lot raising 3 kids, but seeing all that she went through, it was almost the whole reason I decided not to have any kids. 7 years passed, and 2 degrees later, I was married to a man who had 2 kids already. It took me about 2 months to decide to stay with him. It didn't matter that the kids were grown, and I didn't have to do the whole baby process. They were still kids, which meant I still had to yell and smile unnecessarily and be unnecessarily patient. I wasn't born for this. I had told myself several times while preparing breakfast in the morning. I have heard that love is above all things, but somehow, if there was something that could be done about the kids in such a way that I wouldn't be blamed, I would prefer it to having to wake up early to get the kids that weren't mine ready. I slumped into the chair after they left for school, and my husband Matthew had gone to work. I only had to work from home, which meant I had the whole house to myself most of the time, just like I always wanted it. Silent and peaceful, void of children's noise. The TV came on after pressing a few buttons, and the first thing that appeared on the screen was the government trying to curb the act of kidnapping the children. For a minute, I felt disgusted at the sight of the image on the screen of the television. But a part of me silently wished that Matthew's kids were one of those kids. I loved Matthew, no doubt, but I would love him more if there were no kids. If anything could be done to the kids, I wouldn't even mind as long as I had the perfect family I wanted for myself. The one without kids, but with Matthew. I should be able to get the number of these kidnappers somehow, I thought. The superego part of my mind immediately filled me with guilt and consciousness, but I pushed it aside. I'm definitely going through with this. The enthusiasm I felt at the moment pushed me deep into the internet until I got a company who was the top in the business. It took a mastermind to actually know that they were into the business because of how well they designed the website to be different from what they actually did. But it was nothing a degree in computer science couldn't fix. I gave myself a gentle pat and logged into the website. It was filled with all what they did, from the least to the extreme. They paid a huge sum of money to anyone who brought children from below the age of 10 years to them. And lucky for me, I had 2 children below 10 that I could make cool money through. I chatted with one of the employees who told me how they worked and how the kids could not be collected back under any circumstances, as long as the money is paid. All good. You don't know the favor you're doing me by not being able to have them back, I typed back to the employee. I filled all the information I had to about myself and the kids, and where they could pick them up with the dates without anyone noticing, and that was all. I waited patiently for Wednesday to come. It was going to be Matthew and I alone very soon. No disturbance at all. I jumped up for joy at the thought of it. Who would have thought? I screamed into the atmosphere. Wednesday came quickly, and when I opened my eyes that morning, I felt guilt wash all over me, especially after I looked at Matthew's face. He had talked about the future of his kids all night, a bright smile plastered on his face as he talked about it. He loved his kids just as much as I loved him, but I couldn't bring myself to love kids as much as he did. I checked the time and it was just 6 in the morning, just 7 hours until the end of that bright smile on his face. I got out of bed to prepare what I knew was the last breakfast I was going to be preparing for the kids, but also in gladness, I packed the food into the lunchbox. There was nothing I could even do about it if I wanted to do something, because I had received the payment, and telling them that I wasn't interested anymore was going to be the end of everyone in the family, not just the kids. I waved goodbye to the kids and Matthew as they got into the car. I smiled at them for the first time in forever as they waved back at me. They smiled back at me thinking I was just being a nice mother, and Matthew looked happy. Knowing it was the first time I was smiling back at the kids. I checked the time continuously, and when it was 1 in the afternoon, I received a text message of confirmation. Order received. An unknown number texted me. Finally, freedom at last, I thought, and I had barely put down my phone when Matthew walked into the house in anger with 2 policemen behind him. I felt my face turn to the other side from the impact of the slap he gave me. I looked at him in shock, confused about his reaction. How dare you sell my kids? How dare you? Who do you think you are trying to take away my joy like that? He yelled into my face. I saw his fist tighten again. I moved back a few feet to save myself from whatever was about to land on me again. How did he know about it? I thought the agency was secretive. I asked myself a lot of unanswered questions and only got them when I got to the police station. Apparently, the site I placed the order on was the fake one. The one created by the government to catch those who were into the business of selling kids. If you didn't want kids, you could have not married me at all. You're heartless. You would have sold 2 beautiful children into the cold hands of kidnappers? Damn. Matthew kept ranting. Nevaeh, you're heartless. I knew it was the end for me. I should have known that crimes as such were not the ones to bypass the American government. I heard insults from different neighbors as the policemen walked me into the van and different phones capturing the moment. I looked around for the kids and I saw them seated at a corner, their hands intertwined in each other. I'm sorry, I mouthed to them. What? What you've done to them isn't enough? Do you want to kidnap them yourself now? Matthew screamed into my face. He was hurting and probably disappointed, but what could I say? Even after this, I wouldn't like kids. I just knew. I'm sorry, I said to him before walking into the van.
When I opened my TikTok to go live, as I did every morning, I had no idea that I would end the day using this same app to record myself killing my boyfriend, Jeremy. Jeremy and I were seniors in high school planning to get into California University together. I wanted to be a photographer and he wanted to be a model. It was the perfect relationship. Thanks to TikTok, we didn't have to wait until we had our degrees to start doing what we loved and getting recognized for it. We had a couples account where we posted daily. Jeremy had taken an interest in Crestwave Cliff after discovering it on a weekend trip to the beach with his parents. He said the view was incredible from the blue skies above to the waves crashing against the rocks below. He wanted a photo shoot on the cliff. I did not share his enthusiasm. Crestwave was not a very popular place as it was far from the main town, and I worried it was unsafe. It took weeks of pleading and a promise that I was only being paranoid, but I finally agreed to a day's trip to the cliff. So when Friday came, after a light breakfast, but not before a quick picture for the Insta, Jeremy came over in his pickup truck. The drive to the cliff took a couple of hours, and we arrived by late afternoon, but it was worth it when I met the view Jeremy had been going on about. It was everything he said it was, and more. We went around the sparsely populated beach first, before we went up to the cliff. The path up to it took us away from all the other beachgoers and cut through a forest by the side of the hill for a few yards before the foliage opened up to a clearing. It was then I beheld the view. There was no time to be standing around, however, as we were quickly losing daylight. I set up my camera, and Jeremy got ready for the shoot. But before that, we decided to do a little live video showing our fans the view around us. Jeremy moved into position. I turned on the camera feature and just pressed record when I heard the sound of heavy boots against the gravelly earth behind me. Before me, Jeremy's eyes widened in alarm. I turned to find a man in black clothes with a hood that concealed most of his face. The obscurity of his identity seemed intentional, and I started to panic. He called out to us and accused us of trespassing. In a moment, Jeremy was next to me. He told the man the beach was public and we had every right to be there. "Do you now?" the man sneered. "Well, my little friend here says I have the right to take your belongings." He reached into his jacket, and the next moment, he had a gun in his hand. It was then I noticed he had a backpack on. Jeremy put himself between me and the man automatically, using his body to shield me. He drew near, and we retreated. We had our backs to the cliff and our fronts to him. Taking my camera, he stashed it in his backpack. He pointed to Jeremy's phone and gestured for him to bring it over. As Jeremy started to move, the man spotted my watch and asked for it too. Jeremy started to oppose, but I pleaded and passed it to him. Upset, Jeremy took our belongings over to him. But as the man stretched out his hand to take the items from him, Jeremy attacked him, taking him by surprise. He managed to disarm the man, throwing his gun aside as they both struggled to the ground. I rushed to the gun, but I had no idea what to do with it. Jeremy was losing the fight. He asked me to shoot, but I told him I'd never used a gun and I didn't have a clear shot. He insisted, and I made a silent prayer and pulled the trigger. The two men parted. The attacker was in shock. I thought I'd gotten him, until Jeremy bent over, clutching his chest. Forgetting the man, I threw the gun aside and rushed to Jeremy, but he staggered back and fell off the cliff. The man ran off, but I didn't care to see which way he went. Jeremy was dead, and I had killed him.
I scrolled through TikTok while searching for the kind of videos which could make me laugh. I had gone through a breakup, and thinking about it, I knew I wasn't supposed to hurt because I was expecting it. In fact, I had been expecting it for weeks before he finally decided to put it out there. I turned to the other side of my bed and rolled into damp tissue papers, the one I used to wipe my tears when I got back home from my work that night. I was trying to save up by working so I could just go to college. It was my dream to do so. It had been almost 3 years since I finished high school, and still, I was saving what would be enough for me throughout the time I was going to spend in school. I cried more as I scrolled past different couples showing love to each other on their page, all before scrolling to meet another one and then starting the tears all over again. Scroll if you're not the bold one. This is a general warning. That was the first part of the video which got me intrigued. I decided not to scroll. Whatever was there was not going to be romance since there was a warning, and it could be what would heal me of what I was feeling at that moment. Expect to feel this in person as you watch each step of the video. Another warning came up. I sat up on my bed and adjusted myself to an extent where I couldn't jump off or hit my body against something in case it got too scary for me to handle. The first thing that splashed on the screen from the video was blood, which made me jump backwards, and then it went off the screen, and it was all white with dots of red perfectly separated from each other. Suddenly, a broken face appeared on the screen, screaming and punching the screen like it wanted to be free from something. I heard the scream in my head. It was like a voice that wanted to be free, fighting so hard to just come out of the invisible cage it was in. "Stop!" I screamed back at the voice. "Leave me alone!" "No," I heard the voice say back on the screen and in my head. Suddenly, everything went silent again, and the screen was back to its white screen with dots of red. I forgot the pain from the heartbreak that I was feeling for a second and felt so tired and weak for nothing. I tried to scroll to another video, but I couldn't. I was stuck on the video. I tried to move to another section of the app, but I couldn't. "Stop only until the end," I heard a very thin voice from the video. I also felt stuck to where I sat. I didn't have enough strength to get up or even adjust myself. The screen became full of colors again, and I felt so trapped in the video. Everything I could think of was the video and whatever the video wanted me to do. Some details appeared on the screen telling me to send money to a particular amount. "You've done so well, Naya. Here's your chance to show how great you are." I heard the door to my room open, and just when I was about to send the money, someone snatched my phone from me. I felt back to normal, and just before I could thank my sister for doing that, I felt engulfed by sleep. So suddenly I just slumped on the bed and slept. "No," was the last thing I heard my mind say, which I couldn't quite understand. Well, whose mate was heartbreak then?